Thank you, Saloni, for that wonderful introduction. And I have to say, I'm kind of overwhelmed already. I hope we can peel away some more of those layers this evening. This promises to be just the most fascinating conversation. So thank you very much.
Actually, I'm a bit worried because Saloni used the word peeling the layers, and that is generally used for mafia dons, etc.
which you seem to be very familiar with, as they seem to sort of come up regularly in all your novels. But I want to sort of begin by saying that in this time of phone addictions and Netflix addictions and so on, it's not often you come across a book that sort of captures your interest and holds you for the entire 2 or 3 hours that it takes to read it, and this was one such. And it always comes as a surprise when you really, really tune out the rest of the world and just concentrate on the written page nowadays. And it's wonderful to come across books like that. So if you haven't already picked it up, I would really recommend that you do. But there's so much to talk about, Ambassador Swarup, because,
Vikas,
all right.
I'm no longer ambassador.
Because we've known you as the erudite and distinguished spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs, among your many other distinguished designations. And there you are as this incredibly successful author, and that's something that you've just been moonlighting at, if I can call it that. I don't know whether you can say that after 4 books. But if you want to just sort of start off by, and we've had to wait now for what, 10 or 11 years for... 11 years for The Girl with the 7 Lives. So why did it take so long, and how long is it going to take now that you say, now that you've retired? Are we going to see a more prolific Vikas Swarup?
Well, thank you, Ankita, and thank you, Saloni and Shobha and everybody at the Quorum Club for inviting me here this evening. It's wonderful to be in this intimate setting, with the creme de la creme of Gurgaon society. I mean, this is a different city altogether. I'm coming from 62 kilometers away from Greater Noida. So, you have to admire my resilience in navigating that journey. Okay, so the journey as a writer, you were asking me, and you were absolutely right. I was moonlighting as a writer. I never ever considered myself as part of the pantheon of Indian writers because I had a steady day job. I was a member of the Indian Foreign Service, and I was in very hectic, positions as well. My last posting before I was High Commissioner to Canada was as Consul General of India to Osaka, Kobe, and I returned from there in 2013. And immediately thereafter, I became the official spokesperson. And that was probably the most demanding job in the Foreign Service, because every Thursday at 4 o'clock, there used to be an examination where 70 journalists would sit in front of me and they could ask me any question under the sun. And a good spokesman is one who can take a pass at probably 1, maximum 2 questions. That, sorry, I don't know, I'll get back to you. But if you take a pass on more than 2 questions, you're not a good spokesman. So you had to, basically look at all the papers from Monday till Thursday, see what are the possible questions that could come up, and then hope that nothing came out of syllabus.
And I have to say that he was possibly one of the most popular spokespersons of the Ministry of External Affairs, and I have colleagues who sort of swear by him to this day, and there was an absolute stampede at his Delhi book launch because everybody showed up for that.
Yes, so first it was that job, which kept me busy, and there was not even a question of even considering a book, let alone writing one. Right. And then I was posted as High Commissioner of India to Canada. And I chose Canada very strategically, because I had done a stint in America. And I thought Canadians are like Americans, but with better healthcare and no guns. And the Americans that I knew, they would work very hard Monday to Friday, but Saturday and Sunday you could not disturb them unless it was the Third World War or something like that. So I thought, okay, at least I'll get my weekends free in Canada, because, I really call myself a weekend writer. Because when I write, I need that clear horizon. When there's no looming deadlines, my phone is not ringing, and I can think and create for 6 or 8 hours without interruption. So I thought I'll get my weekends free. And I landed up in Canada, and what I did not cater for was the Indian diaspora in Canada. And the Indian diaspora is almost 2 million strong in Canada, 55,000 in Ottawa alone, the capital city where I was posted. And they do everything only on weekends. So whether it is Sonu's birthday, or Holi, or Diwali, or Eid, or Tej, And by the way, Diwali is a very interesting festival in Canada, I'm sure in many other parts of the world outside India. In India, Diwali is a 2-day festival, right? Yeah. You have Choti Diwali and you have Badi Diwali. In Canada, it's a 45-day festival.
Gosh.
Because the first Indian association begins Diwali like 4 weeks before Diwali, and the last Indian association finishes Diwali 2 weeks after Diwali has ended.
So did you ever get time to write?
No, so that's what I'm saying. All my weekends were doing, a happy birthday to the Malayali community, or, going to the Tamil Samagam, or going to the Sikh Gurdwara, or whatever. I didn't grudge that. I mean, for me, that was the important thing. I was there to do a job. So basically, weekends were destroyed in Canada. I could not write anything. 2019, Foreign Minister Jaishankar called me back to Delhi, said, I want you to be Secretary West. So I came back to Delhi, and immediately afterwards, the pandemic started. Right. And of course, during the pandemic, workflow was definitely much less, but, your mind was not at ease. And for me, it's important that your mind be at ease when you're writing. There are no looming deadline, but also, the world should be at peace when you are trying to create.
So how long did it actually take you to write the book?
So that's what I'm saying. So I'm just coming to that. So, and then, a period of transition started from 2021. I was shifting from government service to a private citizen. I was shifting from a government accommodation to a private accommodation. So I think, that period of being unsettled, I waited for all that to settle down, and that's when I really started writing this book. So I think this idea came to me about, in terms of when it first struck me about 3 years ago, and it took me about 1.5 years to write. So that's why there has been this 11-year wait between my last book and
we certainly hope, all your fans would hope that the next one comes far sooner.
Well, it all depends on how well this one does.
I'm sure it'll do amazingly well. But tell us a little about the inspiration behind Devi, because, you have this extraordinary character in her, someone who is constantly reinventing herself. She's morally ambiguous. The kind of things she's done will make your hair stand on end. And yet, there is a quality about her that is so compelling that you're sort of rooting for her from the word go. So, is there any Devi in real life? I know this is the sort of question authors hate being asked, but how do you get under the skin of a character like Devi?
So first of all, thank you very much, because, the words you used, morally ambiguous, and yet you want to root for her, that is exactly how I wanted to create Devi. And in a way, in creating Devi, I was returning to my roots as in Q&A. Q&A was a very safe book, in the sense that, you create a very lovable character called Ram Muhammad Thomas. By the way, he was Ram Muhammad Thomas. He was not Jamal Malik, as in the film. Yeah. You create a character called Ram Muhammad Thomas, whose moral compass is very firmly set. He knows what is right and what is wrong, and he only does the right thing. And that's why you fall in love with him and you want to follow his journey. But in Devi, as you rightly said, I wanted to create a much more morally complex character. Someone, who has a clear notion of what is good and what is bad, but then circumstances compel her to sometimes take the wrong path as well, and she does not shy away from that. So the whole idea was, can I go back to a strong first-person narrative as in Q&A, create the same kind of a tension that was there in Q&A, in the sense of, what happens next, how does he answer the questions. So here also there's a similar dynamic. She's now been kidnapped, she's now in a dungeon with a masked gunman who's threatening to shoot her dead. So there are two parallel tracks running there also. One is the gunman is putting up her life for an online auction. All the people she has wronged in her life, they are now going to bid for her life. So there's this thing happening, and then, of course, the backstories of all of her 7 lives. So that was the idea. I call it Arabian Nights meets Slumdog Millionaire.
Absolutely, because that's something that really sort of sprang off the pages, that you have a protagonist who's almost like Sherazade in the Arabian Nights. She has a captor who's holding her at gunpoint and telling her to tell this story and admit to all the crimes he's accusing her of. And the only way she can sort of prolong that process is to tell her story, or her multiple stories, in the most compelling way possible. And yet you have this situation where her life is going to be auctioned to those she wronged, quote unquote. So what I found really interesting was how games and reality TV shows seem to have a recurrent theme in your work. There's Kaun Banega Crorepati in Slumdog Millionaire, or Q&A as you wrote it first. And there's The Apprentice, where we first saw Donald Trump, horror of horrors. And, even Six Suspects, where you see the perspectives of all these suspects is a bit like Cluedo, somebody mentioned, but, somebody's made that.
Janet Maslin said that in the New York Times.
Right, there you go. And over here also, this is something you think you might find on the dark net, that someone's life is being auctioned to the highest bidder. So is that something that you sort of set out to do, or did it just happen?
No, so you see, structure is very important for me. And all 4 of my novels, if you look at them and if you analyze them closely, you'll see that they have a very intricate structure. I mean, Q&A looks like a very easy book on the surface. It's a fast read. But the structure, I had to follow the conventions of a quiz show in crafting that narrative. I had to be true to the conventions of a quiz show. So how to ensure that there is an organic connection between the questions and the answer was the challenge. In Six Suspects, I am following the structure of a typical police procedure. And that's why the sections are divided: murder, suspects, motives, evidence, confession, solution, confession. Exactly as you see in a police procedure. Mm-hmm. In the last book, The Accidental Apprentice, there are 7 tests that she has to undergo to become the CEO of a $10 billion company. So the one reason why I adopt this kind of a structure is I want to tap a little bit more into the complexity and diversity of India. A unidimensional narrative just cannot do justice to the sheer complexity of our country. But this way, by having a structure which allows you to roam over very variegated terrain, allows you to capture a little bit more of the complexity and diversity of India. So in this particular book, as you can see, her journey takes her from Delhi to Punjab, to Kerala, to Goa, to Mumbai. And in a way, I'm making a comment on, the various social realities that she confronts in each of these roles. Because every time that she is moving to a new place, she is having to reinvent herself.
Yeah. Social realities, religious discrimination, social hierarchies, yes. all of those. I mean, she goes from being Devi to Deepa to Diba, who's Muslim, and that too in an observation home. I don't want to give too much of the story away. There's, But there seem to be sort of supporting characters who come very close to some real-life figures. The millionaire banker who's not, not entirely above board with her practices, or for that matter, the Punjab data chief who yes. has this sort of terrible nexus with very powerful politicians. These are all sort of figures we're very familiar with, without naming names.
Well, look, banker, I do not think I based it, Chandra Kochhar and all that, I don't think I based it on anybody at all. The idea was, most of these stories of the 7 lives are inspired by what is happening in India. For me, the inspiration is real life. The Muzaffarpur horrors of the observation home for girls, the Godman, and then you can take your pick, Rampal, Asaram, this new guy, Ram Rahim. There are so many of them who have gotten into trouble. So, but at the same time, I did not want to situate it as the complex of one particular godman. So the idea is, you read about them, you find out, what kind of a modus operandi they had, and then you craft something fictional based on those real world elements. Yeah. Similarly, the fake degree racket, yes. there also, which is very, very real, you see, and this whole craze of going abroad. Why do people need fake degrees? They need fake degrees so that they can apply for, top universities abroad and get in. Because once you have graduated from a US or a Canadian or an Australian university, you can get a job there and then probably settle down there. So the idea was to really comment on, all these realities that are happening around us. So and they were the takeoff points.
You are engaging with so many different things that are very much part and parcel of our everyday lives. And you don't shy away from the tough subjects either. There's a great deal of poverty terrible poverty that's being talked about, sort of social discrimination, sexual exploitation. But all of that seems to be done with this tremendously light touch. So I wonder how you manage to kind of combine very serious subject matter with this deftness of a thriller, because at no point are you very far away from the fact that it's all also very extraordinary and wondrous and fictional.
Yeah, so that is the most gratifying thing for me, that many people have commented that, I can deal with very tough subjects in a light manner. In the sense that, I, first of all, never want to moralize or sermonize or patronize my readers. that, look, these are the problems of India and I'm going to tell you about them. The idea is they should come in a very organic way, and they should be wedded to a really strong narrative and a strong protagonist, so that you just follow her journey, and then these are snippets that you acquire along the way, so to speak. That's a bonus. The real issue is the crux of the matter is the story and how it is moving forward. So I think it's just my style, the way I write, that for me also, the story comes first. These things, they are part of the narrative, and my protagonist takes it into her stride, and I think the reader also should take it into his or her stride. I think that's the way, that's what I aspire to in my writing, at least.
But do you also aspire to sort of narrative which has a great deal of cinematic quality to it? Because Slumdog Millionaire sort of happened almost concurrently with the book coming out, and how. Take a moment just to think about it. This is a first-time novelist. Most first-time novelists sort of sit around and accumulate rejection slips. And so not only do you have an instant bestseller on your hands, you have a manuscript that's been optioned into a film that goes on to win 8 out of 10 Oscar nominations, not to mention the million other BAFTAs and other awards that it got. So it really is quite the sort of dream debut. But my question really is, did you sort of set out to write books that were easily adaptable to cinema, to radio even?
Yeah, so BBC asked me this question when Slumdog Millionaire came out, that Mr. Swarup, when you were writing this, could you visualize it as a film? And I said I couldn't even visualize it as a book. Because, for a first-time writer, what are the chances of even getting published? So no, there was no question in my mind that Q&A would one day get converted into a film, and I should write in that sense, put in some masala, put in some elements which would appeal to a director. Not at all. I was writing a novel, and that's what I have done in all of my 3 subsequent books as well. But I think people have said that I have a very visual imagination, yes. In the sense that, the way I write is, I first visualize that scene in my head, how it's playing out, and then I write from that perspective. So that's why when people are wanting to translate it into another medium,
it's very easy for them.
It becomes easier, I suppose.
How involved are you in that creative process? When, for instance, a work is being optioned, do you then work with the screenwriter, the director?
Yeah, so let me tell you the harsh reality, that as far as the film people are concerned, the writer is the least important person for them. In fact, in Hollywood, I'm told that the contracts these days are, if supposing Warner Brothers acquires this book to make into a film, Warner Brothers will come to me and they will say, please sign this contract, which will say, we commissioned you to write this novel.
Oh my goodness.
You have now written this novel, and that commission is over. You have handed over the audio-visual rights to us for this book. In any medium currently in existence or yet to be invented, in any galaxy currently in existence or yet to be discovered.
You're
no,
really
seriously.
Signing your life
No,
away.
seriously, that's what it is. They'll give you a lot of money, but then they'll say you have now nothing to do with, yes, you have nothing to do with us. All rights have now gone from you in perpetuity for all time to come in all galaxies yet to be discovered, and you will not speak about this film to anybody at all. That's the kind of thing. I have fortunately had a British contract, which meant I had creative control. Now, this is a very interesting term, which is left deliberately vague, that what happens if there is a violent conflict between your conception of this novel and the director's? You have creative control, but will the director prevail or will you prevail? I can tell you 99.99% the director will prevail because, they are the ones who are converting this. And I think, whenever a book transitions into any medium, whether it's a radio play or a musical or a film, something is gained and something is lost. And I think you have to just...
I mean, there are those who've called Slumdog Millionaire an extreme makeover of
exactly,
Q&A.
Exactly.
To the extent that your protagonist's name is changed, characters are sort of conflated.
And they had that famous shit scene where he jumps into a pile of shit to get Amitabh Bachchan's autograph, which was not there in the book at all.
Speaking of Amitabh Bachchan, though, I feel like he's a huge influence, or at least his films are a bit of an influence. You have this typical trajectory of the rags to riches story of protagonists of relatives separated at birth who find themselves by virtue of the tattoos they have on their hands. I mean, that's absolute 70s, 80s Bollywood films. So, give us a sense of the kind of cinema you grew up with.
No, I really grew up with those kinds of cinema. In fact, did you watch a film called Angur? Angur was very interesting because there in the climactic scene, there are two people and they say that, do you have a tattoo behind your neck? And he says, no, I don't have. He says, neither do I. That means we are brothers. So I really grew up on that fair, and especially I come from Allahabad, now called Prayagraj, the city of the Kumbh Mela, which was the staple diet of all these lost and found formulas. Because people would go to the Kumbh Mela and there would be a huge stampede, and of course the brothers would get distributed. One would land up in a Muslim family, one would land up in a Hindu family, and you would have Amar Akbar Anthony all over again. So I really grew up with that. And I think also the kind of world that I visualize in my books, that world has to hew close to reality. And of course, in India, Bollywood is the entertainment of the masses. I mean, in the first book, Ram Mohammed Thomas and his best friend Salim, for them, the only entertainment is movies. And they go there because to just escape the dreariness of their life, because that's why it's called escapist fare. So, yes, films have played a very, very important role in whatever I craft. In fact, some people say that the last scene in my book, Q&A, where the coin, a coin is flipped, and then you discover that the coin is heads on both sides, which they say is borrowed from Sholay or whatever it is. Maybe subconsciously, I won't know. Maybe subconsciously, I go back to those tropes which I have seen and which I have grown up with. But for me, I mean, I'm not defensive about it. I think, films are an important part of our life. And to the extent that, I can use the emotional quotient that you see in Bollywood movies, and get it into the book, I think it's a win. Because, the thing that differentiates, I think, Bollywood from Hollywood is the sheer emotional intensity, the relationship with the mother, the ma, and all that stuff, which is not there in Hollywood at all.
And yet the works translate so well, both into sort of Indian entertainment, as it's done, for instance, in Great Indian Murder, and a Slumdog Millionaire. How well did that do in India?
Which one?
The Slumdog Millionaire.
The film or the book?
The film.
The film, I think some people...
there were worries about how Indian audiences would react.
A very typical reaction. When it came out, people said this is poverty porn, and there was all kinds of allegations against it. In fact, the best thing was, Ankita, I don't know whether you know this or not, there's an association called the Slum Dwellers Association of India. I had never heard of this. They filed a case against this film and against me, and I got a notice from the Chennai High Court. That, please appear for the hearing, you are a respondent. I said, but please excuse me, my book was called Q&A. I had nothing to do with the title Slumdog Millionaire.
Oh, so they objected to the title.
Yeah, they said that we are people who live in slums, and by calling your film Slumdog, you are calling us all dogs. So that was the complaint. And now you have to compensate us.
And how did you answer that?
No, so I got out of the thing saying that my book was called Q&A. So I have nothing to do. Please file the case against Simon Beaufoy and Danny Boyle, because I have nothing to do with this. So the case actually went to trial. And the judge in Chennai High Court, he opined, he said, look, this is nonsense, because I have seen the Oxford Dictionary. There is no such word called slumdog in the Oxford Dictionary. So this is a made-up word. So obviously, there is no question of, they're trying to accuse you of being dogs or anything like that. So case dismissed. So they lost the case. But then they went and they bought 2 dogs. And they named one dog Simon and one dog Danny.
Oh, well done. That's a brilliant story.
Yeah. So all this thing was happening when this, in fact, the filmmakers had nothing to do with me at all. The only time I even discovered that the film has started shooting is when I read a report in the Dainik Jagaran that these filmmakers, a film called Slumdog Millionaire was shooting in an unauthorized manner at the Taj Mahal, and the people were arrested. And there was this little snippet in the Dainik Jagaran, and that's how I came to know that the film has started shooting. So they trotted me out when this film ran into all this controversy. No, what are you saying? We have enormous respect for you. In fact, this film is based on a book by one of your own writers, Mr. Vikas Swarup. And Vikas, will you please come and bail us out? And
so all the responsibility and none of the...
Yeah, exactly. So this was it. But see, the moment the film won those Oscars, all the criticism disappeared. And then immediately people started saying, oh, an Indian film has won the Oscar. Because
everybody loves
at the end of the day, I do call it an Indian film. It was an Indian film done in the Hollywood style. Because the actors were Indian, the music director was Indian, many of the technicians were Indian. Rasul Pukati also won an award for Best Sound Design. So from that point of view, it was a very typical Indian film. But yes, the sensibility with which this film was done was a Western sensibility. Danny Boyle had never been to India before shooting this film. So when he first came to India and the plane was landing at Dharavi, at the Santa Cruz airport, and you see the Dharavi, I mean, his mind just went into a tizzy. He said, oh my God, look at the cinematic possibilities, the sea of blue that I'm seeing. Yeah. So I think he approached it with a lot of respect and a lot of sensitivity. But of course, in India, people perceived it the wrong way. But then it all disappeared the moment it won those Oscars.
But tell us a little more about what the creative adaptation process was like for Six Suspects, which became The Great Indian Murder on Disney Hotstar. That's also another director whose work I'm very fond of personally. Yes. I feel like he really gets into the nitty-gritty of sort of the reality of India's seamy underbelly. And that's Tigmanshu Dhulia. Did you have a sort of creative association with him?
Yes,
or even
yes.
there, was
it
very hands-on?
No. There, I think it was a totally different experience because Preeti Sinha, the producer, she just loves my books. I mean, she's like my biggest fan, and she has been, so the story of how Six Suspects came to be made into The Great Indian Murder is very interesting. The rights for Six Suspects were actually taken by a British company called Starfield Productions, very soon after the book came out. And they were with them. And they even appointed a director called Pablo Trapero, an Argentinian, to do this film. And I met Pablo Trapero at the Taj Mansingh in Delhi when he came for his, to scout for locations, etc. But then somehow I think the producers developed cold feet that Pablo Trapero is not so well known in the Western world, and maybe, if he makes this film, it will not do so well. So they dropped him. Then they went to another director. Then they went to another director. Then they finally even went to Ritesh Batra, the guy who did Lunchbox. And, every time they were just extending the rights. They were giving me some money and they were extending the rights. So after 6 extensions, and, last extension, they were saying now the producers will be the Hariri family from Lebanon, the guy who got assassinated. I said, my God, Hariri family, our 6 suspects, what is all this? So I said, maybe you're not destined to do this. Because you see, a company in Beijing was after my life. They said this book was recommended to us by the Dalai Lama. Ooh. Now, I mean, I'm sure they were
Your fans are everywhere.
I'm sure they were lying. But anyway, they were after me that, please give us this. And I said, I don't have the right. The rights are with Starfield Productions. So after 6 extensions, I said, maybe fate is not in favor of you doing this film. So why don't you step away now? I mean, I'll give you another 3 months, but after this, I will not give you any more extension. So, they could not do it. So then I gave the rights to the Chinese company based in Beijing. So they were to do the film. And so they did the screenplay, and it was all set in, it was the Sinofication of 6 Suspects. The entire book was set in China. And in fact, in one of the suspects is Mahatma Gandhi's avatar, who gets into this corrupt bureaucrat. So there's a seance and things like that. So they say, in China also we have something like Feng Shui and all that. Spirit will come, this, that, the other. I said, "Theek hai bhai, okay." I mean,
was it Chairman Mao's spirit?
No, God knows. But then they discovered that they ran into a trouble because they said, we submitted the script to the Chinese censors, and the Chinese censors have rejected it. I said, why? What happened? They say, in China, there cannot be crime and corruption.
Of course.
So I said, now what will you do? They say, the censors suggested an option. I said, what? They said, in China, there cannot be crime and corruption, but there can be crime and corruption in Hong Kong. So maybe you can set it in Hong Kong. So they started, they were doing this again, and then the pandemic came. Yeah. And then the pandemic came, and then, of course, I think their production budget went for a 6 because suddenly, companies were closing, this, that, the other. And then Preeti Sinha was after my life that, can we, so she had taken the Indian rights, but she wanted global rights, as I think all producing companies want global rights. So she said that, can we get the global rights now? So I said, okay, maybe this Chinese company also is not going to be finally do it. So then I gave the rights to them. Right. And then that's how Tigmanshu Dhulia came onto the project. And of course, there was a close collaboration because they were looking at 2 or 3 seasons. So I even strategized with their writers on, how will the 2nd season evolve? How will the 3rd season evolve? And then finally what has happened is that after the 1st season, the show has gotten canned because Disney has been bought out by Geo.
Your cinematic adaptations of your books seem to have the same kind of wild trajectory and arc that your novels themselves do.
Yeah. I would rather this not be a roller coaster. Yeah, I would rather this be a safe thing that,
But tell us about this one. Are you already in talks with, I feel like it really lends itself to
one potential bidder is sitting
in
here
the room.
right
Wonderful.
now.
Yeah, we'll have a conversation after this.
So I have been chased by, right now the rights are with, it's a kind of a semi-option kind of a thing with a Hollywood company till September.
And is that a film or a TV series?
It is either of them.
The
option is always either web series or film or whatever it is. So till September, the rights are with them. Then the rights will revert to me. And I'm being chased by at least 3 people who are associated with Netflix and things like that. But look, I'm not that keen that, immediately I want a web series to be made into this.
But it does lend itself
perfectly
it does, well. But you have these 7 episodes which would be perfect, right?
My learning from, the last 2 adaptations is I have to be very, very sure of what is going to be done with the book.
Right. So they've not always been positive experiences.
No, they have not always been. I mean, in the first book also, of course, Simon Beaufoy made me a promise, I'll remain faithful to the soul of your novel. What he did not say is that he'll mangle the body. But that's what happens, when they say they'll be faithful to the soul, the body can get mangled. Here, I think, there's not much potential for mangling. I think it lends itself quite naturally to a series. But I'm keeping my...
Have you thought of casting at all? Because I think most actresses would kill to, say, the role of Devi.
Well, Ankita, you probably have more contacts than I have in the film industry. But, people have asked me this question, and the one actress that comes to my mind is Alia Bhatt. But the de-glammed version of Alia Bhatt, the Alia Bhatt of Udta Punjab, that kind of avatar. Because, obviously, she's portraying a street girl. And there will probably have to be 3 actresses because, the child actor doing her from age 2 to age maybe 10 or something like that, then a teenage actor doing the juvenile home, and then the more mature one. So I think it would have to be 3-in-1 kind of a thing. But as I said, it all depends on whether the girl with the 7 lives has a new life as a film or not. I'm not, as I said, looking into it that, okay, I have to strike while the iron is hot. I met Kai Bird at Sanjay Roy's Jaipur Literature Festival, and Kai told me that, look, it took 18 years for Christopher Nolan to give me a call that I want to make Oppenheimer based on your book. Wow. But the only question I asked Kai Bird was, I said, are you going to the Oscars? He said, Christopher Nolan used to call me every time, when he was getting the rights, and I have sent him 3 mails, and he has not responded to them, of calling me to the Oscars.
But speaking of the Oscars, you were there on stage when Slumdog Millionaire won all of those prizes. So what was that like? Did it seem like a very far cry from the day job?
It is. So if you look, if you just Google Slumdog Millionaire at the Oscars, and then you will see a picture. There'll be 25 people on the Oscar stage when Steven Spielberg has just handed over the Oscar. And all of them are looking straight at the camera. There's only one guy in a black bangala who's looking at the ceiling, and that's me. And literally, what's going through my head is, what is a professional diplomat doing in the Kodak Theater? No, literally, that's exactly what I'm thinking, that how the hell did I land up here? Because, to be at the Oscar was a fairy tale. It was really, and what I loved about the Oscar is, Oscars are very democratic, in the sense, the caste system exists only at the red carpet stage, where the stars walk the red carpet and you walk a brown carpet or something on the side. But once the red carpet ends, then you are a guest and Brad Pitt is a guest. Yeah. Brad Pitt does not come with bodyguards. Meryl Streep does not come with any sidekicks. They are all there in their capacity as guests, and you are also there in your capacity. So I met everybody. I met Brad Pitt, I met Angelina Jolie, I met Will Smith, I met Meryl Streep, I met Valentino, the fashion designer. Yeah. You could just walk up, because, see, the Oscar ceremony is exactly like they show it on your TV. 10 minutes of ceremony and 10 minutes of advertisements. So when the advertisements are happening, nothing is happening at the Oscar stage. So basically, that's when people are networking. So they are either they're going to the bar, getting a drink, or going to the toilet, or just, walking up to people and having a chat.
Much like the Ambani wedding, you can see Mamta Banerjee and Kim Kardashian in the same frame.
Exactly. I think it was just that. And Anil Kapoor was sitting next to me, and I think it was his aim that, look, I'm not getting back from Hollywood till I land a Hollywood role. And he landed 24.
Okay.
But the interesting thing happened to me after the Oscars, because once the Oscar is over, there's complete bedlam. People are either moving to the exit to get their cars, or they are going to the governor's ball. Arnold Schwarzenegger was hosting. Aparna, my wife, was with me, but she was not at the Oscar. She was at the after party. So I had to get out and meet her. So I was not going to the governor's ball. And I went into the wrong way, and I ended up in Jennifer Aniston's makeup room.
Oh my goodness. What did your wife have to say about that?
So Jennifer Aniston, it was just she in the room, and I am there. And I have stumbled by mistake into her room, and she looks at me. I'm in my black bangala, and I'm just having my book in my hand. Right. And she looks at me, and she says, "So you are the man?" And I said, "Yes, I am the man." And then we had a 10-minute conversation where she says, how much I love India, and my God, this film has done amazing. It's a wonderful film, and right film for the right time, and whatnot. And then she says, "Okay, I'm going, come with me." So I walk down with her, and then I see there's a gentleman called John Mayer also walking with her. I had no idea who this guy is. Anyway, so she walks down. I also walk down with her. She goes down into a parking lot. And she tells whoever is the parking attendant, "Can you get my car?" Of course, Miss Aniston, and he calls into the mic, "Please bring Miss Aniston's car." And 30 seconds later, a sleek limousine, stretch limousine, lands up, and Jennifer Aniston gets into the car. John Mayer gets into the car, and she says, "Okay, enjoy the rest of your time in LA," and she pushes off. And I go to the parking attendant and I say, "Can you call my car?" And he says, "Who the hell are you, sir?" So that brought me down
Hollywood
to
hierarchies are clearly as
he says, "Sir,
well-defined.
You have to get out that way and get your car from there. This is for VIPs only, So made it very clear, what your standing there was.
I'm sure you could have taken revenge had it been, say, a Canadian High Commission party or something. And then Jennifer Aniston could have been asked to take the back gate.
No, I think Jennifer Aniston would still take precedence even there.
But, talking about sort of, stratification and hierarchies and so on, that's a trope that you sort of seem to come back to in all your books. And we touched upon this earlier. But I do want to know, look at Gurgaon, for instance. You talked about Dharavi and how Danny Boyle kind of responded to that. But here we are in this building that looks like it could be anywhere in the world.
It could be in Dallas, absolutely.
And, you step out and not too far away, there are the slums, there are the gypsy markets, there are all of those who are kind of living cheek by jowl with perhaps some of the most well-off people in this country. So these extreme disparities are very much all around us and kind of rich pickings for a writer like you. Would you set a novel in Gurgaon? Or Gurugram, as it's called? No?
Actually, I have never lived in Gurgaon. I just visited, and mainly I visit Sanjay Roy, when he calls me for his Christmas party, etc. So I have not really lived in Gurgaon, but look, the world that I have created in the first chapter of, rather the second chapter of The Girl with the Seven Lives, is a bit like Gurgaon.
Well, it's Noida, it's NCR.
Yeah, it could be anything. Basically, there's a sprawling slum called Rail Basti set on either side of a railway track. And right next to it is a huge mega city, built by a private developer called Wish City. Yeah. It could be JP Greens, it could be DLF, it could be Gaur City, it could be any of those. It could be Lodha, it could be anything. I mean, look at the Four Seasons in Mumbai. The Four Seasons in Mumbai is bang in the middle of the slum. You have to navigate through the slum, in fact, to get to that hotel. So this, no one is an island in India. I mean, that is a very clear-cut reality. Even the rich, their lives are constantly intersecting with the poor. And that's why at one point, Devi muses that, television has done one very bad thing. Because till then, you see, the Sector 1, which is this gated community of the uber-rich, she has only glimpsed it from far because they cannot even enter without an ID card. But through television, and the lives of the rich and famous, all that stuff, they get a glimpse into this world, this privileged world, which they have never seen. And then they realize, oh my God, that's how the rich live. They have these yachts and they have these private planes and this, that, the other. And that's when she says, then we hated our world even more. Because, then the starkness of their existence juxtaposed with the existence of the uber-rich becomes that much more apparent.
Yeah. And then I suppose there's the greed, the ambition, this need to kind of barrel through all the adversity that life throws at you.
Yeah, exactly. Because you see, this novel is really about, all my novels are about exploitation and about hierarchy, how the poor exploit how the rich exploit the poor, how the, powerful exploit the less powerful. And I think Devi is one of those characters where she rails against this. Because there is even a throwaway line where the father says that we were untouchables in the village from which he migrated to the city. But that word is never repeated throughout the novel because for Devi, that is of no consequence at all. She does not accept that, the circumstance of her birth is now a determinant for the rest of her life. She is constantly trying to make a better life for herself. So in that sense, this is a book that harks to aspirational India. And I always say this, that even Dharavi, the world's largest slum, is not a place of despair. people in Dharavi are constantly working, trying to make a better life for themselves and trying to get out of that slum. Nobody is moaning and groaning and saying, oh my God, where have I landed? And I think that is really what accounts for the dynamism of India, that people are constantly on the move, maybe on the make also to a certain extent, and that's why the crime and corruption that we see all around us. But nobody is standing still. Everybody is trying to create a better life. And the key that most people have understood, especially the poor, is that education is the key. And that's why the rickshawala says, I am a rickshawala because I didn't get an education, but my children, my son or my daughter, they will definitely get an education so that their life will not be determined by being a rickshawala.
And it's interesting to see how sort of education is something that Devi initially rails against, but then she realizes that in certain situations, she can acquire skills that will take her to the next stage of her life.
So in a sense, this harks back to Slumdog Millionaire, where Ram Mohammed Thomas has street knowledge as opposed to book knowledge, but that is also a kind of knowledge. Yeah. You know, the car mechanic would know much more about the V1 engine than you and I would know. So that is also a kind of knowledge. And if you look at her character, every situation, whether it's the juvenile home or whether it's the Godman's ashram, she's learning something. Yeah. She's acquiring the skills that are needed to survive in that particular role. And I think that's the leitmotif of this novel, you know, resilience and adaptation and reinvention.
Yeah. And, you know, she's a nurse in certain situations. In Bombay, in Mumbai, she's also becomes a beautician. And I have to say, for me, that was the most unnerving part. This is this distinguished diplomat that we've known.
Writing about manicures
writing about manicures and pedicures. Exactly. I mean, how much research went into that?
A lot, because I have never been inside a woman's saloon, you know. So I had to do, but the good thing is these days YouTube videos tell you everything. You know, exactly how a manicure is done, what the right amount of pressure to be applied, you know, how the exfoliation is done and things like that.
How hard is it to think like you know, to acquire the voice of a female protagonist?
Yeah, so look, the confidence came to me really from the two previous experiments I had done. In Six Suspects, Shabnam Saksena's character, she was a Bollywood actress. That was written in her voice, and I enjoyed that experience. And that's what motivated me to do a complete book in the voice of a female protagonist, which is Accidental Apprentice, Sapna Sinha. Yeah. And nobody, not even one criticism came at me saying that, Mr. Swarup, you, as a male writer, you could not do a female voice. So I think that gave me the confidence that maybe I can create another character, but this time from the lower strata of society, because Sapna Sinha is firmly middle class, maybe middle class, not definitely not upper middle class. But
this is about as rags to riches.
This is exact. So as I said, this was returning back. So look, for me, there is no trick as such, because I do understand that a woman looks at the world very differently from a way a man does. I mean, if I'm walking, even in Gurgaon, in a dimly lit place at 11 o'clock at night, you would be looking over your shoulder, whereas I would not be. When you are traveling in the metro, you would be wondering, you know, whether your personal space is being violated or not. I would not be. So definitely, I think a woman looks at the world in a very different way.
It was very interesting that you mentioned that, because, you know, there was this quiz where women were asked if there was, you know, what would be a perfect world for you? And they said a world without men, where we wouldn't have to worry about walking through the night at midnight or anywhere else.
And that's why all women compartments and all women buses and all women toilets
don't always
and things like that. No, I know. But at the end of the day, this is a reality that we have to grapple with. Yeah. So for me, the trick is, I can do all my research I want, but you know, at the end of the day, how do you get inside the mind of a woman? So for me, the thing is, you just have to have that leap of faith and get that quality of empathy where you start imagining the world as you are looking at it through a woman's eyes. Yeah. And then try to create from that perspective.
She's very much the successor to your protagonist in Q&A as well. Yep. She's sort of the literary progression in a sense.
That's right. And that's why, as I said, more morally ambiguous. So from that point of view, it was a tougher character to create. Because, you know, I have to get the reader to fall in love with a character who's morally dubious. And yet, to succeed in that, you know, is a bigger achievement than crafting a very simple, safe story like Q&A.
So tell us a little about your literary inspirations. We've already talked a bit about Bollywood, but you said you talked about growing up in Allahabad, now Prayagraj. Did you sort of grow up on a diet of thrillers? Were there favorites?
That's right. So my reading actually was mainly Western thrillers. So I read all of Agatha Christie, Alistair MacLean, Desmond Bagley, Irving Wallace, Earl Stanley Gardner, you name it. All of them.
Do you believe there's almost a sort of syllabus of authors that everyone in the former colonies
Yeah,
grows up with?
Those of us who have had English medium education, I think we all grew up on Enid Blyton,
P.G. Wodehouse,
or the girls would have grown up on Nancy Drew and things like that.
Hardy
So I think,
Boys.
yeah, these were all part of, these are also tropes in the sense, because that was the standard diet of literature. But most of my writing about Indian writers was in Hindi.
Oh.
Yes, so I read Upendranath Ashk, I read Suryakanti Tripathi Nirala, I read Mahadevi Verma, I read Harivansh Rai Bachchan. In fact, my grandfather was his lawyer.
Oh.
So I had read
What was
all
that?
of...
Did you
that
ever
was very
meet him
interesting. He used to
personally?
come to our house and he used to recite Madhushala. We have him on those spool tapes, reciting Madhushala. And I remember my grandfather was the Solicitor General of India. He had moved to Delhi and I had moved with him because I was his favorite grandson. And he brought me to Delhi and I was going to St. Columba's school. And I remember Harivansh Rai Bachchan ji coming to our house and telling us that Amitabh's new film is coming called Anand. Yeah, I remember him saying that. And
did you see it then?
Yes, of course I saw it. And I had read, actually, I was maybe, 9 years old or something like that, and I had read all his novels. I had read Neel Kanirman Phir, Kya Bhoolun Ka Yaad Karun, Pravas Ki Diary. I had read all of them. Of course, he wouldn't have believed me if I said as a 9-year-old, I have read all your novels.
Yeah, that's
so
fairly precocious reading list.
So that was it. So when I was actually writing my first novel in English, Q&A, I first wanted to see, I said, and I wanted to write a thriller, as you know, because that was my diet and that was the genre I was addicted to. So I said, first let me understand who are the great Indian thriller writers. So I went to the Golders Green Library, where I was living in London at that time, and I said to the librarian, I said, can you give me thriller books by Indian writers? She says, there aren't any. I said, what do you mean? She says, there are no books by thriller writers who are Indian that I know of. Yeah. I said, that's just not possible. We are such a big nation and so many writers. How can... She says, no, there are none. So I said, okay, then who are the Indian writers whose books are in this library? So she says, okay, so you can take Arundhati Roy, you can take Vikram Seth, you can take Raja Rao, you can take Khushwant Singh, you can take Manil Suri, you can take Rajkamal Jha. I mean, all these books she gave me.
The people who take 6 pages to describe a sunset,
yeah,
as
so
you
anyway,
once said.
So I took all those books. I could borrow 26 books at a time, and I took those 26 books, and I read all of them. And I discovered 2 things. I said, first of all, not one of them has written a thriller. And secondly, all these books are about society. They're about social modes in India, whether it is Mulk Raj Anand talking about untouchability or Vikram Seth talking about a middle-class family and going through a wedding, and Arundhati Roy talking about an underclass trying to aspire for the upper class. They're all about society. So I said, if I'm going to write a thriller, it'll probably not do well because maybe genetically Indians are not well disposed to write thriller. At that time, at least.
Yeah.
This is 2003.
It's very different now.
2003 I'm talking about. But I couldn't get rid of that fixation of writing a thriller. So I said, okay, maybe I'll create my own genre, which I call social thrillers, where I'll write about society, but in a thrilling kind of a way. So that's how.
Social thrillers is a wonderful job.
So that's what I.
So do you think you've sort of spawned the next generation of thriller writers, or the first generation of thriller writers?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, there are many more writing crime,
Ashwin
writing
Sangvi
sort of very
is
popular.
writing, yeah, even Chetan Bhagat is writing thrillers now. Yeah. And there are so many. When I look at Amazon and I see, what are the bestsellers, there are so many, somebody is setting a murder mystery in Mussoorie, somebody is setting it in Coorg, and lots of people have invented these, detective character.
OTT has a role to play as well, because many people are now writing with that in mind.
Yes, I think definitely many people are now writing with that think at the back of their mind that tomorrow maybe someone will pick this up. And plus, you see, the most lucrative thing is to create a detective character that you can then replicate in all of your novels. And then,
turn it into a franchise.
Turn it into a franchise. And somehow, it just does not appeal to me, because then I would almost feel imprisoned by that character, that I only have to write novels based on that particular character, who I have done to death already. So for me, I have, that's something I have shied away from. Yeah. And I think I like this idea of creating a fresh narrative out of, complete a blank page, so to speak.
I know there are lots of book club members here, so they'll probably have lots of questions, but I'm going to just sort of ask you one last question and then throw this open to them. I hope, as I said before, we're not going to have to wait for very long for the next one. Do you have some ideas already? Anything you could share with us by way of what's next?
So at any given point in time, I think I have ideas for 5 or 6 different novels. Definitely, that is there. But look, I'm also attracted to non-fiction. In fact, one publisher is after me to write a book on India-Canada relations. I am also attracted to this whole paradigm of artificial intelligence and what it's going to do, how it's going to change the world. Because I think, the world has become so complex now and so interdependent at the same time, as COVID-19 showed us, that I think a non-fiction book covering on, India's take on the world could also be useful. So, as I said,
but
this is my...
on diplomacy per se.
Nothing on diplomacy per se. No, maybe something on geopolitics, because I think geopolitics is what's driving the world these days. I mean, look at the titanic changes that are taking place.
And the intersection of AI and geopolitics would be fascinating.
Yeah, I think that would be also quite interesting. But I am convinced next 5 years, you will have singularity, which means you will have artificial general intelligence, which means you will not be able to distinguish between, I mean, the Turing test will be failed. You will not be able to distinguish between machine-created writing and human-created writing. And that is, I think, going to be the most challenging phase.
And to some extent, we've already seen some of the fallout of that in Hollywood, with screenwriters going on strike.
Absolutely. Because, once you have the super intelligent machine, which has read every book in existence, which has read every screenplay in existence, which has watched every film in existence, and then it is trying to put together what works and what does not work. And then you create a novel or a screenplay from that. I don't know what's going to happen. The only silver lining is, as the head of MGM famously said in the 1930s, nobody knows anything. That what works and what does not. Because if it did, every film would be a hit and every book would be a bestseller. But it is not. Because I think the secret ingredient of what really makes a film work and what makes a book work is still, I think, a curious alchemy, which just comes together at the right time for some.
There's no replacement for creativity at the end of the day, and you don't know that a machine can replicate that.
But a machine, machine is creative. I mean, ChatGPT itself, I mean, how creative it can be. I mean, the worst thing about ChatGPT is it hallucinates. So a batchmate of mine, he had never used ChatGPT, and his wife was very curious. She says, Vikas, you are on top of your game, and this husband of mine doesn't know anything. Teach him a little bit of ChatGPT. So I opened ChatGPT and I said, okay, tell me everything about this gentleman. I put in his name and I said, tell everything. And he started saying he's a member of the Indian Foreign Service, and he did a posting in Russia, and my wife is getting more and more impressed that, my God, this is amazing, he's pulling out all this thing, and then says, and he died in 1988.
Oops.
So that is hallucination,
Right. Or a similar name that is picked up from somewhere.
And his wife said, you are never doing ChatGPT ever again.
Right. We'll throw this open for a few questions, I think.
Anyone?
No questions.
Nobody's asking. I have a question.
Nandita is there, yes.
Thank you. Very interesting conversation and stories. So my question is around your process of writing. Do you write in long form or do you write on the laptop? And typically, how many hours do you kind of set aside when you're writing?
Yeah, good question. So I do not write in long form at all. Neither my first book nor this book, no books have been written in long form for the simple reason, I do not have writer's block, but I have writer's cramp. This is something that developed when I was doing my graduation, and I completely messed up my psychology examination because of this, that suddenly my fingers just completely seized up and I just couldn't hold a pen. So because of that, I just type on the computer. And the way it operates, as I mentioned to Ankita earlier, is I need a clear horizon, which means 6 to 7 hours when I'm not doing anything. In the sense, I'm not going to a party, nobody's coming to my house, my phone is not ringing. So for me, the best time to write is between 5:30 and 9 a.m. Because then the world is quiet, everything is at peace, my phone is not ringing, and I can actually sit down and get 4 and 5 hours of concentrated writing. So that's what I do. And then as the day progresses, my writing tapers off. I cannot write at all in the night at all. So that is, for me, that is the most productive thing. And generally, the way I write is I first let the plot develop in my head for maybe even 6 to 7 months. Then, once I have fleshed out all the character arcs, where my character will go from A to B to C to D to Z, then I do the research. Okay, she's going to a juvenile home, I need to know everything about a juvenile home. She's working in a beauty parlor, I need to know everything about a beauty parlor. She's working in a godman's ashram, I need to know everything about a godman's ashram. Once I have done the research, Then I start writing. And then, as I said, I write mainly on, now that I'm retired, it was easier for me, 5:30 to 9. And then as you come closer to the novel, maybe you can write a bit more because, then you want to, the torrent wants to come out faster, so to speak. But generally, it takes me about a year and a half to write my novels. I got lucky with my first book, which I wrote in 2.5 months. Yeah. But then that's an advantage you can only have for the first book because you are writing unself-consciously. You are not evaluating yourself against anything else. So I think that's a benefit, a privilege available only to first-time writers.
Any other question? Yes.
Vikas, do you rewrite?
No. So in fact, Q&A also, what has been published is my first draft. 6 Suspects, what has been published is my first draft. The Accidental Apprentice, I think I changed the ending a little bit. But again, as I said, when I write, then pretty much that remains the final draft. I do not do a lot of rewriting, which is very unusual because most...
And did your editors have a significant part to play, or do they sort of not?
No, I mean, this one also, I thought, my editors, but it was very lightly edited in the sense they just changed, okay, comma, full stop, maybe this word looks better here or something like that. Basically, they all agreed with my vision, and nothing really was changed.
It's hard to argue with an Oscar-winning author.
No, I don't know. I mean, in fact, that was my complaint to my editor. I said, I expected you to be more firm, and he says, no, but basically, I loved what you had written, so why should I unnecessarily change things? If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
Vikas, hi. Navroz here.
Hi.
We both are from Allahabad.
Yes.
So we all grew up together. You mentioned a very interesting thing about not having writers who are writing thrillers in India. And we all grew up reading James Hadley Chase and all those things. A very interesting anecdote, which you might remember, an author. He was not an English, writer. He was a Hindi writer in Allahabad called Ranu.
Called Ranu?
Yes. R-A-N-U.
Oh,
and
yes.
he writes pulp fiction.
Yes,
absolutely crazy.
But I have read Ved Prakash Sharma, I have read Ibn Safi, Colonel Vinod and Captain Hamid. I have read all of...
So he came to my mother, who was a teacher of English, and exactly the same discussion happened almost 45, 50 years ago. Yeah. And he asked my mom, can you please translate my Hindi books into English? Because there is no English, thriller available. So she actually sat and wrote and translated this guy's books from Hindi to English. So it's true.
No. In fact, thank you, Navroz, for pointing out. In fact, Ibn Safi is being translated only last few years.
Yeah. I think the whole translation movement
because
was also
suddenly,
really
the English-speaking world has discovered Hindi pulp fiction. Yeah. That could also...
Malayali pulp fiction,
Ved Prakash
Bengali
Sharma,
pulp
Ibn
fiction,
Safi, their books are now being translated into English. But look, what I discovered then still holds good. No Indian thriller writer has made it big in the West. Even these writers, they are really writers who are read in India or by the Indian diaspora.
No questions to Vikas, but something to share about Vikas, which I don't think anybody in this room knows.
Oh my God.
Vikas was an absolute ace when theatre was concerned.
Oh, wow.
So what theatre lost, the Indian Foreign Services gained. Yes. So
is that something you might sort of dabble in again now?
No. Last theatre I did Badal Sarkar's Julus when we were in the academy, and I won the award for Best Director.
Oh, so maybe you could direct one of your own. Maybe you can start your directing career with The Girl with the Seven Lives.
No, but what is interesting is that Q&A became a musical in Japan. Not the Slumdog Millionaire, the film, but Q&A, the book, because they didn't have the rights for the film. Right. So they did the book, actually. So there's a character called Ram Mohammed Thomas. Of course, they're all singing in Japanese.
So you've had musicals, you've had radio plays,
yes.
Films,
that's right.
Web series. So it's really sort of, that
No, I said it in an interview that, the only thing I'm waiting for is a Ram Mohammed Thomas Happy Meal to go with your French fries.
We've heard you mention quite a few authors in context of the questions that you were answering. Would you have any writing heroes, especially amongst the contemporary people globally?
No, absolutely. I think I always thought of myself as a reader, and I always tell, people, students, when I meet them at universities or at schools, that if you want to be a writer, first be a reader. You cannot be a writer if you're not a good reader, because only then you'll know what is good reading, good writing, and what is bad writing. Absolutely. So yes, my heroes were, of course, growing up, it was this pantheon of thriller writers that I mentioned, and what I admired about them was that they could create plots, which could move along at a rollicking pace and keep you engaged and want to turn the page and find out next. In fact, I used to borrow books from, I don't know whether Anupam, you remember this, Anil Book Depot in Allahabad, and he used to give books, rent books out at 25 paisa per day. Yeah. And my aim was to finish the book in that one day itself. So 25 paise mein hi, Leon Urie's Exodus, I think I finished in one day, even though it was a pretty big book.
Yeah, so, I remember these circulating libraries used to have like a monthly thing, and then it was because of readers like you, possibly, that it became a daily rate per book.
Yeah, so one was this renting library, and one was this Kabadi Wala. Because, Kabadi Wala you could pick up, I mean, he would have no idea, that this is a bestseller or whatever, and he would sell them, 10 rupees kilo and something like that. So pick up whatever you want. So that was the thing. But then, of course, later on, my reading broadened. I like J.M. Coetzee. I like his style. I think Disgrace was a fantastic novel. I like Paul Auster, who died recently. I think the New York trilogy is just an amazing book. I like Haruki Murakami. Again, I mean, I'm not a magical realist writer, but the way he combines magical realism. I mean, I like writers who write fluently, in the sense, when I was on the Man Booker Prize, it was the Asian Man Booker Literary Prize, I created a scandal because I said, for me, the criteria is readability. And they said, hey, this is sacrilege, what are you talking? We are judging literary books by their literary merit. I said, but how can a book have literary merit if it is not readable? Right. I mean, for me, that was crazy, but that is why this big schism between popular writers and literary writers, because unless you have, written about a sunset in 8 paragraphs, the book is not considered meritorious enough. I mean, I think Albert Camus said it correctly. I think Oscar Wilde said it correctly. There is no such thing as a moral book or an immoral book. A book is either well written or it is badly written. True. And I think that's what it should be.
Thank you.
Saloni has a question.
I mean, you said 25 paisa, so I'm just going to take you from there. See, you're a diplomat author. But suppose you were an author. Can you make a living in India being an author?
No, so that's why I always say that I could write only because I was in the foreign service. And I had my bread and butter taken care of. If I was writing as a writer, then I would be dictated entirely by the market. I would write what the market wants me to write, because if it fails, then my family is out on the street. So that is, I think it was the fact that I had a steady day job that freed me up to create what I wanted to create, not what the market wanted me to create. So when I was writing 6 Suspects, I knew from the first page that this is not going to be as big a success as Q&A was. Because Q&A, as I said, was a safe book. This was a seditious book, in the sense I'm creating 6 different characters, all of whom are totally dislikable, and yet I wanted to make them compelling enough. And yet they are speaking, and also they are speaking to you in their own different voices. One is a telephone transcript entirely. How do you create narrative tension through telephone transcript? You can't say that he is tall, he is short, he is fat, but through the transcript itself, you have to give clues to the reader. So the idea was, I wanted to test my boundaries as a writer, that can I write a polyphonic narrative? And I said, I'll use this experiment, because if it doesn't work, no problem. I already am a diplomat, no damage done. But if I was not a diplomat, if I was a full-time writer, then I think it would have been a very different, unless, as I said, you reach that stratospheric level of, a Chetan Bhagat or a Amish, where, publishers will come and give you a 11 crore contract or something like that, then it's a different matter. But otherwise, you have to be...
few of them.
You have to be, you have to... In India, 99% of the writers I have met say that you cannot survive as a writer in India, because even the advances are so paltry. I mean, Penguin just says, be happy that we are publishing you.
No, but actually, to just extend that question further to the whole publishing industry, even the industry itself is struggling in many ways. Yeah. So, I mean, where do you see sort of publishing really going from here? So do you only then bank on your bankable stars like a Chetan Bhagat or Amish, or do you broad-base it? Do you give new authors a chance?
The way I look at it, on the one hand, you had what is called the democratization of culture. So I would say the democratization of writing, in the sense, when I wrote Q&A in 2003, it was published in 2005, when I wrote it, There was no Amazon 70-30 deal. There was no book blogging. There was no, self-publishing. I mean, probably vanity publishing was still there. But it was a very rarefied world. There were gatekeepers, which means you had to go through a publisher and you had to go through an agent, especially in the West. You could not go to a publisher directly. You had to go through an agent. So the gatekeeper system was very much in existence. Today, these days, the gatekeepers have been completely pushed out. Anybody can write a book now. Anyone. Without knowing a thing about writing a book, you can just write even trash. Amazon will say, I have no problem. We will give you 70%
The gatekeepers can sometimes be part of the problem. And if I'm going to...
No. So the thing is, there has been the democratization.
I'm going to come back to a little anecdote.
Whenever you have the democratization of culture, you have the devaluation of the product.
Yeah.
That is what has happened. So books have been devalued now. A book is now competing, with other forms of attention. You're saying, should I read this book or should I watch this Netflix serial? Or even better, I'll wait for 6 months and maybe the Netflix series will come out on this book and I don't have to read this book.
Yeah.
So books have become products just like, a pair of sneakers, and people are making their buying decisions based on, do I need to spend $4.99 on this book or $7.99 on the Reebok sneakers that I've been eyeing? And because of that, I think the culture of reading itself is in decline. I mean, look at the number of libraries that have closed down.
Or bookshops.
I mean, we all, in India, I grew up that a book cannot fall on the floor. Ye vidya hai. Immediately it falls, you do like this, oh my God, But that culture is gone now. I mean, books are treated as just another commodity and as disposable as anything else.
Yeah. And I think the commodification of books is also something that perhaps has happened, very much in front of our eyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's how you write a bestseller, how you publish it, how you sort of
and plus,
promote it also.
Yes, no, this is, you see, when the last book came out, Instagram was not in existence.
Yeah.
Now, on Insta, I was not even an Instagram user. I have maybe 1,500 followers.
But that was a wonderful video reel.
Yeah, but look, so now I am first getting acquainted with this whole world of book influencers, and my Instagram is flooded with people, sir, do you want us to promote your book? And we charge very nominal rate, etc. And now I realize that now my Instagram is flooded with Tauba steps. And this is all, this Tauba people, this is not just organic. They have paid all these influencers thousands of rupees, ki please just, isko viral kar do, just do Tauba steps so that the whole of India is just doing Tauba. So that's the way.
How does an author do a Tauba then?
No, but that's really, if you really want to do it, I think that's the way to do it, because, these days, as the old adage goes, any idiot can write a book. It takes a genius to sell one. And, how do you sell a book, especially in a very crowded marketplace where how does your book stand out? So it stands out by, spending 10,000 rupees and going to all these influencers and says, pe blog likh do, 5-star review dal do Amazon pe, ye kar do, wo kar do.
And multi-city tours.
That's the way it is, which, I find it slightly demeaning in the sense a book, if it is a good book, it should sell through word of mouth. But as we are discovering, even a good book can sink without a trace.
Right. Sad as it is.
So I was actually going to ask you about the library, because you seem to have said that libraries, reading books is what prompted you into writing. But increasingly, we are seeing libraries closing, or there are no libraries like the ones you could borrow books of. So I don't know how the next generation is actually going to, what sort of literary work is going to come out of that. But we can keep fingers crossed about that.
No, so that is why forums like these, book clubs like yours, are so important, because you are keeping the culture of book reading alive.
Yes.
V.S. Naipaul declared the death of the novel maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was implying the death of the 800-page novel. Not the death of the novel, but the death of the 800-page novel, because basically attention spans being what they are. Nobody wants to read an 800-page novel any longer. Because books, as I said, are now competing with other forms of entertainment. And your attention is distracted with so many different things. But books are important because, books are the carriers of our civilizational legacy. And books are the, what should I say, they are the transmitters of our culture also.
So shouldn't we start a campaign where we start actually emphasizing that we should have libraries everywhere so that people start...
I think it starts with the student stage. I think schools have to encourage the book reading habit. When I grew up in Allahabad, we used to have these debates and things like that. All that culture has ended.
Yeah.
We don't have debate contests, we don't have declamation contests, because all that was engagement with words. You had to write something, in order to speak. So writing itself, the culture of writing itself
But would
is
just
giving
having libraries or more bookshops actually work? I feel like you have to sort of work on the person first, because honestly, unless you put your phone away and you turn off the television, which, let's face it, none of us are doing right now, how does that even start?
Yeah, everybody's, no, which is fine with me. I have, I personally prefer to read, I mean, I don't have a Kindle. I mean, I have a Kindle, but it's black and white. I prefer reading on the iPad. And I can have 300 books on my iPad, easily. And plus, at my age, I can increase the font, have backlight. So for me, actually, reading on the iPad is better than, reading a physical, especially a book which has very small print. So that is better.
Do you get distracted at all, or do you?
No, I think I can, in fact, I can finish a book much faster if I'm, reading it on the iPad. Yeah, because then, because these days with this, ink-like consistency, it's almost like, you're reading a physical book, except in digital format. So I think the culture of reading has to be.
Here's a sort of slightly different question. Do you feel now that with all the sort of literary tours and book tours that you do and all the sort of promotional, that there is much of a market for, the spoken word? People want to come and meet authors and listen to them and hear about their books, but how many of them are actually going back and then reading the books?
Yeah, because many people who actually come to book events are aspiring writers themselves, who are hoping to get inspired, or maybe there's a creative logjam and they are hoping that, just going into a talk and hearing an author saying, okay, his book has come out, maybe my book can come out. All that is there. You're right. You see, problem is many people, especially the literary books, what is happening is many people want to show them on their shelves, but they have not actually read them. And that's why there's a big market for these easy digest books, where they summarize Elon Musk biography for you in, 10 pages or something, so that at your next dinner conversation, you can appear well-informed that I have read Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk.
They're now sort of 10 points on Instagram usually. No,
plus, you see, the thing is nowadays you will just say, okay, I'm going to this dinner party, I need to appear to be having read 5 books. ChatGPT, tell me which are the 5 books I should have appeared to have read, give me their summaries. Wow. And ChatGPT will do it for you. That's the real problem. So ChatGPT will make it even harder now for you to read and to write, because ChatGPT will do the writing for you and ChatGPT will do the thinking for you also.
How well do you think ChatGPT is actually writing? Because at the end of the day, it all sounds
it's like writing very well.
Something an intern would write.
I mean, AI has cracked the operating system of humanity, and our operating system is language. AI has cracked it. And that is why I'm saying it will be impossible to distinguish human creativity from machine, because, you could catch out AI because of the use of language, which used to be so stilted.
But it's growing by leaps and bounds.
You do Google Translate and you do ChatGPT Translate, the world of difference, I'm telling you. Because ChatGPT knows syntax and knows grammar. That is the biggest change. And that's why it will write you perfectly. In fact, journalists like you are in even bigger danger, because now you can write a completely trash piece and then just go to ChatGPT and say, now reformat this in the style of New York Times. And New York Times could not detect that it was written by AI. New York Times could not detect. Most recently, a researcher submitted research applications to, Fulbright and Rhodes. I mean, you are Rhodes. 4 of them got...
I had unfortunately no ChatGPT when I was writing my statement.
Got accepted for all of them and has accepted Fulbright. And his submissions were written entirely by ChatGPT. So there you are.
I just entered synopsis of The Girl with the 7 Lives. So it says, I couldn't find any information on a book or story called The Girl with the 7 Lives. However, I can suggest a possible synopsis for a story with this title and give me the whole story. With Maya being the protagonist.
Good. Okay. So next Sanjay is coming out with The Girl with 9 Lives.
So the question I wanted to ask is that your protagonist is a woman, right? So do you think it's man versus woman? Women have more facets to them, so it's easier to write about them.
When I devise a woman character, I always, I think I get not just 2 for 1, I get 10 for 1, because I think women are so much more fascinating. They are much more complex, number 1. Number 2, they operate at several levels, I mean, you have the mother, you have the wife, you have the seductress, you have all kinds of avatars of women, so that is there. But for me, what attracted me was, I get that mix of determination and yet vulnerability. that is something which you will not get in a male character. Male character, you'll either make him a wimp or you'll make him a very ultra macho kind of a character, And I wanted that mix of determined, same as in Sapna Sinha's character, In fact, when she goes to the Hanuman temple in Connaught Place and this Vinay Mohan Acharya, this billionaire, meets her, he says, I was looking for someone who has both determination and aspiration, and I saw it in your eyes. Yeah.
So,
Sure.
Because this is Rajneesh.
Rajneesh, yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned about your interaction with university students, college, young people. Just imagine, though I am your junior at school, just imagine as if you are answering my question, addressing a guy like that. So what are your tips, 3 tips for an aspiring author? And the other related question is it easy to write a fiction or a non-fiction?
Okay, so the 3 tips, I'll have to think on my feet now. First tip is a very simple tip which I give to everyone. Write something which only you can write. New York Times did a survey that, of Americans who felt they had books inside them. And 81% of Americans said they have books inside them. Well, 90% of those books should remain inside them. They should not come out. Because, their story will be their typical grandmother story, which may not be of great relevance to people outside their immediate family. So first of all, you have to write something which you feel has never been written before, and only you can write. That's number 1. Number 2, do not write for fame or money or for it to be converted into a Netflix serial. Because if you do that, it will neither be a Netflix serial, neither will it be a good book. You have to write as a book and just write the best book you can write. And third, I think you have to be true to the character you create. Because, if you start thinking that, I want this to be a global novel, so isme ye dal dete hain, maybe this proverb will not work, people in Netherlands will not be able to understand this. There is no such thing as a global novel. It is always a local novel which goes global. Because people pick up that novel for that sense of authenticity. Then only, for me, it was a realization that happened to me in my first book tour in Australia. A woman in Adelaide walks up to me and says, Mr. Swarup, your book gave us such a fascinating window into Indian culture and society. And I was zapped. I said, when I was writing this novel, I had no idea I'm giving somebody a window into Indian culture and society. I was writing as an insider for insiders, as an Indian for Indians. But because I wrote it with that sense of authenticity, that is why when a foreigner picks it up, they get that sense of authenticity that this is how India works. This is
And I think
Indian
you make that point so brilliantly with the banker's character.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
moment she's sort of using Devi's story, it comes across as inauthentic.
Because it is inauthentic. And when she writes her own experiences in the jail, then it becomes authentic.
Yeah.
So that is, it was a subtle play also on this whole thing of tapping into something and, making it your own, even though it does not. So these are the 3 tips I would say. And what was the other thing you asked me?
As in, is it easy to write fiction or non-fiction?
I think for me, it's easier to write fiction because fiction, there is no boundaries. In non-fiction, you have to hew close to what actually happened, unless, of course, you are making up a lot of stuff, along the way. Because in memoirs also, people have, added a lot of stuff which never happened. But if you're writing non-fiction, then you have to do a lot of research and you have to write what actually happened. In fiction, what I love about fiction is the freedom it gives me. That even the laws of physics need not operate in my universe if I don't want them to. And that's why you can write. And these days, with the kind of tools available, I can write a novel set in Colombia if I want to, without ever having set foot in Colombia. Provided I do my research and create an authentic backdrop so the reader in Colombia is not able to say that, this guy is not writing authentic stuff. So that's what for me, fiction is easier. And these days, in particular, as they say, even, what is happening in the world is so crazy that they say no fiction can even top it.
Yeah, I just have one last question over here. And
yes,
we'll call this evening. Oh, you have a question. Okay, second last then. What is it with diplomats becoming authors? Like it was just last month, Mr. Ajay Basaria was here.
Correct.
This month you are here, and we at Quorum, we feel amazing about this. So I really want to understand, what is it with diplomats becoming authors?
So that's true. Actually, so many diplomats have written books. In fact, Humphrey Hawksley, the BBC correspondent, told me once, he says, I have yet to meet an Indian Foreign Service officer who is not in search of a publisher. Because there are so many of them. I think different members of the Indian Foreign Service who have written books will have different takes. My own take is that, look, the only training we have as diplomats is to use words very carefully. Because unlike the IAS or the IPS or the income tax, I mean, income tax people probably are trained to look at numbers very carefully. Audit and accounts are trained to look at financial data very carefully. IAS and IPS, probably they do a lot of legwork. IFS, our main trade is words. We have to use words very carefully because one wrong choice of word can send relations with another country into a tailspin. So I think it's that fluency with words, that comes in handy when you're trying your hand at something other than political reporting and the normal diplomatic stuff that you do. So I think that is probably the reason. But at JLF, Sanjoy put me on a panel where I had to moderate a discussion with 3 IPS officers who have written novels. And I began with this. I said, why does IFS get a bad rap? IPS is equally prolific. And the thing is, IPS has much more material to mine because they deal with. I mean, IFS people are kissing the hands of princesses. IFS officers are breaking the bones of rapists and mafia dons and things like that, So they have many more interesting, they have much more material.
So I have a craft-based question. You talked about how important reality is to you when you write. But when you create a character like Devi, how important is plausibility as well? Because you do a lot of research in terms of the events that have occurred, but when you weave them together as happening to one person, how do you make it plausible, and what is then your research at the human level?
Yes, so plausibility is very important to me because my books are not magical realist fables and things like that. Some people, yes, sometimes I add a touch of screwball comedy. In 6 Suspects, it was the character of Larry Page, for instance. Here also, I think the second chapter, the one where she's working with the banker, is because, it's a playful chapter where I'm, taking a dig at a rich socialite trying to write about a poor, underprivileged person, which could be a dig on me as well, But then the thing is, that is why I do not base my characters on any real people. Because then it is actual exploitation. If I actually have, a servant's daughter and I mind that, call that daughter every day and say, मुझे बताओ खाना कैसे खाते हो तुम लोग, घर में 5 लोग कैसे छोटे से कमरे में रहते हो, privacy कहाँ होती है? I mean, that would be nonsense, because then you are really, exploiting. So basically, you don't have to understand life as a poor person. You don't have to become a poor person. You can imagine it with that quality of empathy. That's the point I'm making. And the way I write, for me, believability is very important. That, you see, that's the difference between a film and a book. When you go to a film, when you sit in that theater, you, in a way, put your mind back home. Ki boss, yahan pe there will be a willing suspension of disbelief because a lot of stuff will come to us which is not happening in real life, especially these superhero movies and all that. So you take it for granted that we will be shown stuff which does not happen in real life. But in a book, if the believability quotient is very low, you will just put down the book in after 3 pages and say, this is nonsense, no slum.
But you do stretch your reader's credibility to some extent.
So the idea is to create larger than life characters. Okay. That is what I say. Yeah. That you create characters which are slightly larger than life, but yet create a backdrop which is very authentic, so that even when you know that this is slightly larger than life, there is no actual Devi that I have seen who could also do all these things. But who yet who could lead yes, but yes, you can imagine in your head that yes, a Devi could be like this, and maybe she was so extraordinary that she could do these things. So yes, I would admit that my characters are slightly larger than life, but they operate in a very believable world, and in a world in which there is no fantasy element, where whatever has happened, you actually can see that actually happening to her. And I want there to be an organic connection between all her 7 lives, that I'm not just parachuting her. Hey, Kerala would be nice because when tomorrow the Netflix series is made, they will cover the boat race and they will cover this, no. The idea is, it has to be organic. Yes, I wanted a bit of the geographical sort of diversity of India, so that was important from that. But then I have never lived in Kottayam. I have never lived in Kerala. I have just passed through Kottayam on the way to LFP.
But those houseboats are beautiful.
Yes.
And would look very good in a web series. Thank you very much indeed for what has been an absolutely engaging and at the same time really wide-ranging conversation. And I have to say I enjoyed myself thoroughly, so I hope you did too.
A big round of applause for Ankita. I think one of the best moderators that I have had in a very long time. So thank you so much, Ankita,
I'm very honored.
For bringing the best out of me and for being such a fantastic and engaging audience. Thank you, Saloni. Thank you, Shobha. I mean, this quorum, my God. The quorum is complete.